Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out in this weather. I'm visiting from Southern Illinois, and we have 74 degrees and sunshine right now. So, so I was like, oh, I'm going to Chicago. I'm going to be on the river. I didn't bring an umbrella. I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be fun. But I'm excited to be here with you all, and we definitely appreciate you coming out and enduring this weather, right? So it is my absolute pleasure to welcome you here to our fifth annual event, Standing Together, which is a conversation about equity. My name is Kianya Inge. I am a current doctoral student at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, but I am also directly impacted as I served 11 years in the Illinois Department of Corrections. So it is a great honor to be here with this group in this the panel here, and to have them advocate for us and the barriers that we face as women that are directly impacted by the justice system. The panelists have a uniquely valuable perspective on their advocacy in the community, in their local communities, as well as the state of Illinois. And we appreciate all the work that they do in bringing our community together and coming together in solidarity and inspire us to be a more caring society for the individuals that are directly impacted by injustices in the state of Illinois. And it's just a wonderful feeling to know that you have sincere advocates out there speaking for you. You know, sometimes people have ulterior motives when they tend to take advantage of our community. And so we appreciate the panelists and that they are sincere and caring in the work that they do, and they represent us well. So we definitely appreciate that. So let me tell you all about this fabulous leader of mine at Heartland Alliance, our wonderful Evelyn Diaz. She is our moderator today. Evelyn is the president of Heartland Alliance, one of the world's leading human rights organizations. Right, we're leading, and she's building and inputting in women like me to lead. So we appreciate that. Where she leads the executive team directing domestic and global strategy and operations. For more than 2 decades, Evelyn has been a leader in the nonprofit and government sector, starting as a direct practitioner, leading economic development initiatives, and serving as a public official. Under Mayor Rahm Emanuel, she led the city of Chicago's Department of Family and Support Services, where she was responsible for administering programs in the areas of children, youth, homelessness, domestic violence, aging, workforce development, and human services. If everyone could please help me welcome our wonderful Miss Evelyn Diaz.
Thank you. Thank you, Kianya. And I'm going to just say, you just clapped for me, but we're going to clap for her in just a second. Thanks for the introduction, and also just Kianya is a leader in one of our programs called Fully Free, and there she's leading a coalition of individuals who have lived experience with the prison system and have come out and experienced firsthand the many barriers in Illinois to establishing a safe, secure future. And it's probably one of the bright lights in the state of Illinois, not nearly as well known as it needs to be, but I just want to thank you for your dedication to making sure that those people who have been involved in the criminal legal system aren't permanently punished, but really are able to build safe, stable, and secure futures. And thanks for sharing your lived experience. It's a vital part, it's a vital voice that we need to hear in today's discussion. I have asked Kiana to join us on stage for the Q&A portion, and so we'll see her and get a chance to hear from her again a little bit later. Thank you. In the meantime, I want to acknowledge and thank our board champions for this event, Chris Brathwaite, Charlie Garrido, Ted Michalke, and Rianne Zweifler, for prioritizing the issues that impact women and lifting the voices of women in leadership. Please join me in thanking our board champions. And finally, I'd like to recognize some public officials. Actually, not sure if they're here yet. We are expecting, if they aren't, Illinois Deputy Governor Sol Flores, a friend, and City of Chicago's Director of Reentry, Willette Benford, and of course, you know that we have as a guest Illinois' First Lady, M.K. Pritzker. Thank you all for joining us this morning. So, the U.S. system of incarceration is a system of over-incarceration. Its size is an anomaly in the world, and it's a system that does damage to every life it touches. Today, 2 million people are locked up in state and federal prisons, and 3 million children have a parent who is in prison. The damage done transcends generations, it disproportionately affects people of color, and it negatively impacts individuals and communities well beyond the person who experiences the incarceration. Today's conversation is intended to shed some light on a few of the areas related to the criminal legal system that affect women specifically. Women are the fastest growing population in prison settings. In fact, according to the Sentencing Project, an organization that advocates to minimize imprisonment and criminalization, over the past 30 years, the number of incarcerated women increased by more than an astonishing 475%, increasing from 26,000 women in 1980 to 150,000 in 2020. That's about 500 times more women than are in this room, and nearly 3/4 of them are mothers. Women living on the outside who have an incarcerated family member also face numerous hardships and as a result of their loved ones being in prison. And unsurprisingly, all of these barriers disproportionately impact women of color. Fortunately, there are organizations, advocacy groups, and government leaders, including today's panelists, who are designing and implementing programs to support affected women and working tirelessly to change policies to reduce incarceration and ease the burden on women. I am honored to introduce them now. First, I'd like to start by welcoming Patrice James, founding executive director of the Illinois Black Advocacy Initiative. Patrice was appointed to the role in 2022 to build the organization from the ground up and establish a plan of collective advocacy and policy solutions for the needs of Black communities throughout Illinois. She has a career-long engagement on issues facing women in prison, and I think she is a bright light in our advocacy community. Welcome, Patrice. Next is the formidable M.K. Pritzker. She is the First Lady of the state of Illinois, and for over a decade, M.K. served as a leader of the Pritzker Family Foundation, fostering solutions in the area of early childhood development and women's health. Through her work at the foundation and in her role now as First Lady, M.K. has remained dedicated to improving the lives of women and children affected by the justice system. Welcome, M.K. And finally, our very own Raquel Pullums, Program Manager for Heartland Alliance's Ready for Reentry program. Raquel joined us in 2017, was quickly promoted to lead teams facilitating cognitive behavioral interventions for men at the highest risk of gun violence involvement. And today she works with future Ready participants while they're nearing release from prison. She is one of our MVPs. Please join me in welcoming Raquel and all of our panelists. Just a couple of notes before we begin. We're going to have a Q&A at the end of the panel. Please write your questions on the notepads provided, and our team will come by to collect them around 9:05. We are recording today's session as well, so I want to let you know that. And let's get started. Patrice, I'm going to start with you. You joined us as a panelist 3 years ago at this very event where we were talking about permanent punishments. And so welcome back. It's an honor to have you here again. Back then, we had asked you to talk about some of the root causes that are driving inequities, particularly around Black women who are involved in the criminal legal system. At the time, you had mentioned root causes like barriers to accessing mental health and substance use treatment, the disinvestment in and racism toward Black communities, and that historically there had been little to no concerted effort focused on addressing this impact of the system on Black women specifically. So 3 years later, what's different today? Has anything shifted or changed, either in the world itself or in your own thinking?
Yeah, thanks for the question and thanks for having me. It's really great to be in this space with you all. So I'm going to begin with a high note. Since, I believe, 2020, through the leadership of advocacy organizations, government officials, the Department of Corrections, even our very own First Lady, the Illinois women's prison population has been cut by 50%. And that was a concerted effort from many people. And I think that that is a great way to begin, that we are moving in the right direction in Illinois. And I can't not shout out the work of Willette Benford, who is now leading the city of Chicago's reentry work, but works with Women's Justice Institute and is just a trailblazer in advocating for women who have been formerly incarcerated and are currently incarcerated. So that is really great news, and that's really exciting news. But there's still more work to do. Even though we have cut the prison population, disproportionality racially still exists. So, Black women have led incarceration rates for decades. And despite reducing the prison population, Black women are still overrepresented in our prison populations. I also want to make a note, oftentimes we talk about the prison population, people who are locked up in the state system, but honestly, the majority of people are actually incarcerated in jails. In our local systems. And we as much work as we need to do to get people out of prisons, we also need to talk about reducing our jails, the size of our jails. I lost my thought after when I wanted to make that point. Reducing our jails. So the disproportionality remains despite the reduction. There's also, unfortunately, been an increase in rural communities of actually white women going to prison in Illinois. I think one of the things that has led to a decrease of prison admissions are honestly some of the reforms that have happened here in Cook County. I think here, with State Attorney Fox making some reforms to her office, there's honestly just less women entering the system through the courts, which is a good thing. Oftentimes, women are incarcerated for property offenses, quality of life offenses. There are absolutely women going to prison for violent offenses, but the vast majority it is nonviolent offenses. So changing things like drug penalties is really helpful, and driving offenses like DUIs and theft crimes. Seeing a reduction of those types of crimes not having prison sentences really has helped reduce the incarceration and also just finding pathways out of prison through programming and sentencing credits, et cetera. So we are headed in the right direction. There is obviously still more work to do, especially when it relates to disproportionality. But we are moving. And so I wanted to make sure that I did start with that we are in the right direction. And it is because a lot of advocacy and a lot of focus has been put on the issue. And it just shows what is possible when you have a clear vision and the supports necessary to implement that vision. We are doing the right things. The other thing I just also wanted to say, we often talk about like programming and what are the things that women who have been most marginalized need. And sometimes it's not so much programming, it's just also just how we show up and support one another. So things that I think are really helpful are, Illinois just passed paid sick leave. Things like supports to women who, as we are just living life, are really helpful, especially for those who have been most marginalized. So I can pause there and
that's a great place. Let's talk about trauma that women experience in the system. We know the trauma often impacts not just the woman herself, but also it carries over into her family. So can you talk more about the systemic trauma and if there's any promising programs or policies you've encountered that work to address that particular issue?
Yeah. So prison is I imagine really traumatizing, and it's prisons, and maybe this is more from my perspective on my work with male prisons, but I imagine women prisons to be the same, are really violent and hard places to be. And so there's that piece of the trauma, but going through the life cycle of a case. So I used to be a public defender before I started the policy work. And so just from arrest through the end of the case, the experience is incredibly traumatizing. From being arrested, sitting in central booking, to going back and forth to court, in the way that people are dehumanized through the process. It is trauma on top of trauma on top of trauma. That doesn't include the trauma or experiences that people have prior to coming into the system with no real supports or places to process that trauma or be provided with tools to address that trauma. But it's not just the person who's been incarcerated or going through the experience that feels that trauma, right? It's also the family, and it's also the children. It's something like 80%, I think, is the statistic of women that are incarcerated or experiencing the criminal legal system are parents or are mothers. And I think it's more than half of that 80%, they're also head of household. So when a mother is incarcerated, what happens to those children? What happens to the stability in those children's life? The area of work that I always say is parallel to the criminal legal system is the work that I have done and many others have done around the foster system. There's the driver of our foster system numbers is not necessarily incarceration, but the same traumas and experiences that women who are going through the criminal legal system also experience through the foster system. And what I often say to try to really illustrate and paint the picture of what these two systems are doing to Black people and to Black women in particular is what the criminal legal system is to Black men, the foster system is to Black women. And so, Black families through the criminal legal system and through this foster system are losing our families. Our families are being destroyed. Our families are being torn apart. And so there's a lot of work to do. I know we are here to talk about the criminal legal system, but if we're talking about women and in my work, talking about Black women in particular, I really cannot, I would be doing a disservice to not talk about these two parallel systems and the impact that they have on Black communities, in particular our children. It is something like 50%, half of Black children in their childhood, so infant to 18, will experience a child protection investigation. So if we often talk about the school to prison pipeline. It's really the foster system to prison pipeline. Mm-hmm. And so when we talk about addressing root causes, how do we reduce numbers of people and women in particular going into incarceration? We're really talking about starting at birth. We're talking about providing women, especially those who have been most marginalized, with the supports and resources that they need and the family supports that they need, and not in paternalistic ways. And I think that that's also part of a challenge, is that sometimes service providers and services that we offer to families are not always the best, and they're not always given in culturally responsive ways. And I think a positive is that you have initiatives that like Cook County Health is leading, along with the Women's Justice Institute, and again, our leader over here, Willette, who are working with service providers to provide culturally responsive programming and services that are actually accessible and wanted by people in the community who actually need them. So there are positives. There's, again, still more work to do. I think a big area of work is really through sentencing reform. We are sending far too many people to prison, and we're sending people to prison for too long. Mm-hmm. The reality is, and once people are in prison, it is making sure that they actually have programming and supports that when they exit prison, that people are actually able to live abundant lives. Because the reality is, majority of people who enter prison, they are coming home and they are coming back into our communities. And so what do we hope for them? We need to make sure that people have accessible housing, that Kiana and others are working on. Many people return from incarceration, and because of things like, I think many people have heard of ban the box and asking, have you been incarcerated? People can't access housing and well-paying jobs. I'm not even saying high-paying, well-paying, sustainable jobs and salaries, so that people can actually re-enter. So we have a lot of positives, but we also have more work to do. And to me, that's just opportunity. We have the opportunity to create better conditions for all of us, not just people who have been incarcerated.
Great. Perfect. I mean, you've painted the picture, and all of its dimensions. I
could keep going.
Right? We could talk about
my TED Talk.
Yeah, exactly. But you use the word destroy, and I, in my opening remarks, I chose to use the word damage. I edited out severe damage because I didn't want to use hyperbole, but it is severe damage. It is, as you point out, layer upon layer of trauma. Destroying families and not providing adequate supports inside or outside, afterward or before, and I think we have to use that kind of strong language so that people really understand how broken and dangerous this particular system can be to lives. So thank you for that. I'm going to move us on to Raquel. You lead a team at Heartland Alliance in the Ready Chicago program. And I'm wondering if you could just start by explaining to the audience what Ready is and what's the Ready for Reentry program, the role you're playing in supporting women and families that are impacted by incarceration.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for everyone for showing up this morning. So, I don't know if I'm too close to someone.
You're good. No.
Okay. All right. So Ready for Reentry is a program that is a community violence program that launched in September of 2017 as a response to the peak of gun violence in 2016. And so with that, the model is to serve men who are at the highest risk for gun violence, whether that being victims or perpetrators. And so how we did that is we, as an Heartland Alliance, partner with several community organizations in the Austin area, West Garfield, Inglewood, and North Lawndale. And so the partnership consists of different outreach organizations and transitional job partners throughout the city. And so what we do is provide cognitive behavior intervention groups coupled with transitional work, for 12 months. And we also include wraparound services through case management. And so we work with the men for 12 months, helping them to process their thinking, slow down their thinking so that they can make better decisions. But also, we also know that employment and, making money is a way to survive. So we want to provide them some opportunities for career pathways. And so back in, again, when we were going through the randomized controlled trial with the University of Chicago, it was found that the services that we were offering were actually decreased gun violence. And so a year ago tomorrow, April 1st, 2022, we launched Ready for Reentry. And so we expanded our services to go inside of Illinois Department of Corrections. And so with that, we started a little bit sooner. So before they get out, we wanted to, again, provide those same Ready-like services. So the cognitive behavior intervention groups, preparing them with job readiness training so that when they are released, we can start connecting them to employment opportunities. And so with that information, we end up thinking like, okay, what more can we do, right? If we want participants to have a successful reentry, I think we need to look beyond just connecting them to the resources as well as employment. And so we came up with the idea of trying to figure out how we can strengthen the household that they return to. And so that's where a lot of our work with the women came into play, right? And so when we started to reach out to the family members just to introduce ourselves, to say, hey, we're working with your son or your brother or something like that, right? We wanted to just introduce ourselves so that we can get their buy-in and hope that they can also assist us to making a successful reentry. But then we quickly found out that many of those family members we were contacting were women serving in those supportive roles, right? And so that's when it dawned on us like, okay, there are a lot of women who are clearly serving and impacted individuals, trying to help them, remain positive, get back on their feet, because we know that they will be returning home. And so from there, it was one particular family I called a participant's girlfriend. Just again, say, hi, I'm Raquel, working with your loved one. And she was just saying, okay, I love the work that you all are doing, but I'm struggling. I'm struggling trying to support him. I'm struggling trying to, take care of our children without him. And so it was that conversation that led us to know that we had to do more. And so what we did was we came up with a family engagement component of Ready for Reentry. And so we wanted to reach out to the families again, not only trying to see if they can assist us to help our guys stay on track, but we wanted to come up with some services or a plan that we can support the household. And that's where our family engagement work with the families came in.
That's awesome. I almost want to just stay there and extract more. But I also want to talk about you were on a panel discussion about A Woman on the Outside, and it was about a film called A Woman on the Outside. Mm-hmm. And it's a film I highly recommend to everyone here today. And Raquel, you were on a panel talking about the impact of parole and on the reentry population. And here's another adjacent system, right? The parole system. And so can you give us some idea about the complexities of parole, how it affects women?
Yeah. So in Illinois, when we say parole, we really mean like mandatory supervised release, or MSR. You might hear that a lot, MSR requirements. And so one of the complexities of that is when people are coming home and they have these requirements, right? It's an extra level of scrutiny that they're under. They're like, they make a wrong move. They're afraid that they're going to be back, go back to prison. And so with that scrutiny, it makes it hard to just go by and live your day to day, because you're in constant fear of, okay, if I'm going to do something wrong, I can quickly go back to prison. So in the film, The Woman on the Outside, Crystal, who was the main character of the film, She was helping her father, who was incarcerated pretty much all of her life, right? And luckily she had contact with him, through phone calls, but also when he was released, she thought, like any other person, let me help my dad. Let me help him. I know he needs a job. He has to support himself. So I'm going to, let's try to call them like side hustles, right? Where it's like, okay, it's not really working for somebody, but it's not doing anybody any harm. And so I'm going to buy you some socks to sell, right? These socks is something that, you can make a profit of, and make some money for yourself. So in her head, she's thinking that, I'm doing something that's going to help my father gain, employment and have an income. But unfortunately, the socks had marijuana leaves on them. And so because of the MSR requirements, it was that wasn't prohibited. And so he was arrested and sent back to prison. I think the reason was he was promoting illegal substances or something like that, right? And so those type of things quickly can do more harm to not only him, but also the family. He was out, he was with his child finally, his grandkids, and, having that removal is another trauma that they will impact, that they will go through. Outside of that, we have this house arrest system, right? Where participants will come home, but they can't leave the house for a certain amount of time. And so that, again, delays the progress when we are trying to help our individuals move forward, right? You've done your time. We want to move forward. Let's connect you to resources and employment opportunities. But if you can't leave the house for a certain amount of time, that delays that progress even further. And so I'll tell you a quick little story here is that we had a participant come home and he was not able to meet with his parole officer for about 2 or 3 weeks. So, we have this plan and we're like, okay, this is what we're going to do. This is what they're going to do. We want you to go to this job fair. But unfortunately, again, he's like, my PO still hasn't get in contact with me. I can't leave. We're like, what is going on? And so that, again, it's just another added pressure. Like, okay, I'm still not able to move forward. And just like with many other fields, you're going to have your employees who are, quality, and you're going to have some who aren't, as quality employees, right? And so parole is no different. We have different agents that are going way above and beyond supporting, connecting their parolees to different resources and just making sure that they're really advocating for them, right? But then we have others who are punitive, who any little thing, you're like, okay, they don't want to really hear anything. And so that is another complexity that it's like, okay, I'm trying to move forward with my life, but sometimes people don't want to see me move forward, and so that can also be a burden that is put on people that come home from prison.
Yep. I'm hearing you, and I'm hoping that what the audience is getting is we start by talking about the incarceration of women, and you quickly move to these adjacent systems that are equally oppressive. And just, it's kind of like, instead of wraparound services, it's like wraparound oppression, right? It's coming at you at every angle, every step. And that's what I'm taking away. Thank you for sharing those stories with us, Raquel. I'm going to move on to MK. MK, you have made incarcerated women and solving that problem a priority for your advocacy during your time as First Lady, setting goals to dramatically reduce the number of women in prison. Why is this issue of particular importance to you?
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I'm very happy to be here with you all. The reason why this issue has become so important to me and really ingrained deeply in my heart happened over 25 years ago when I was invited to visit Cook County Jail And I spent the day there, and there I met 3 generations of women, a daughter, a mother, and a grandmother, all incarcerated in Cook County Jail. I was just dumbfounded, and I could see the progression of the justice system on each of these women getting progressively worse, with the grandmother who was completely damaged from the system. And I thought, how could this happen? And that was my first exposure to it over 25 years ago. Then I was the director of our family foundation. I ran a charity and a grant-making committee through Northwestern Hospital that focused on women's health issues. And we had several grants that came to our committee that talked about this very issue, where I started reading about it and understanding it. And thereafter, JB was elected. So I knew this was an issue that I really wanted to become involved with. And I'm very grateful that I had that training before I became the wife of the governor.
Great. And there's kind of another dimension of this. And in lots of industries, we know that women are often underrepresented in leadership positions. And that's, of course, true in the prison system as well. Can you just explain why this is a particular problem in the prison context, and tell us some of the steps you've taken to ensure that women have adequate representation in prisons?
Well, when JB was first elected, the first thing I did after he took office is I went and I visited Logan Correctional Facility, and I was shocked at what I found there. I went in the warden's office, who was a male, and the leadership of the facility was over 90% men. And I said, where are the women? There weren't any. And subsequently, we discovered all kinds of misunderstandings about women that were held by the men that were in charge of this facility. I want to remind you all that 95% of women who are incarcerated in our state have experienced some form of gender-based trauma or violence. And so when they are incarcerated in a system where the men are in charge and not really well trained on women and how women operate and how they feel, that is viewed as further trauma to these women. And we're doing further damage to these women by incarcerating them in this system. So I knew immediately we had to change this somehow. And I'm happy to report now it is flipped. Now it's 90% of women in charge of the women's facility. Thank you. So we have a dedicated woman in charge of the women's correctional division that's on the executive level in the Department of Corrections, which has been very helpful. My husband is 100% behind this, and we're trying to change the culture in the women's prison. So that is one major thing that we have done. And we've also instituted a women's parole division. Mm-hmm. So now the parole officers are trained in women's issues and trauma. It's so important to treat the trauma for these women to help them get their lives back on track. And that is another major step that we've done.
Yeah, I feel that. I feel like if you can, it's an important step, right? Then there's all the policy change and the sentencing reform.
All of that.
But you can imagine
that
just having that one change of having women in leadership means that you can imagine the implementation of reforms being done the way that it needs to be done in that setting. You were recently at the Clinton Foundation's Women's Voices Summit, and you had shared that Governor Pritzker's administration was able to reduce the number of women being incarcerated in Illinois by 50% during his first term. And of course, we heard Patrice talk about this at the top as one of our, highlights. This is an incredible goal and an incredible accomplishment in 4 years. Can you tell us how did this happen? How was this goal met? How did you do this?
Well, let me just first of all say that was one of my husband's goals from day one when he took office, that this was something he was very interested in doing. I would like to say, too, he's also reduced the male population by a quarter. Mm-hmm. And Patrice, you did a great job outlining how this happened, but I'll just piggyback on that and a few other things that we've done. First of all, as awful as the COVID pandemic was and continues to be, that actually helped us reduce the women's population by letting, through the parole review board, looking at women's sentences and finding those who were very close to being released and releasing them early because we didn't want them to be at risk of getting COVID. And so that really helped us achieve that goal. We also found, along with the problem with the men being in charge of everything in the women's division, we found a lot of inequities in how, what they call good time and things that in the prison you can earn time off your sentence. There were a lot of inequities between the male and the female system and how that was implemented. So we made some changes so that women were given more opportunities to reduce their sentences. I would also like to say, I think people don't really understand what happened with the budget impasse of the former administration, that all the programs in the prison system were just ceased. There were no addiction services, there were no programs for people, there was nothing to help them. And reinstituting the social services and the supports that people really need, there was no way for them to earn time off their sentences. If they can't get their GED, they can't complete addiction training, they can't complete parenting classes, it extended their sentences. So we reinstituted the programs. That helped tremendously. And these are just some of the things that we did. We also have wraparound services now that we didn't have. For instance, help getting every person who's being released now will get their ID, have access to their ID, their birth certificates, their records. This helps people get housing and jobs. They couldn't even get a library card. So people just need some services and some help. And I firmly believe we really need to invest in people and not in incarceration. It's so important. And we need to look at people more than what their conviction says. There's a narrative. Every single person that's incarcerated has a narrative before they are incarcerated. There is a story. We need to understand how they got there. How can we intervene? How can we reduce the number of people being incarcerated? These mothers, this is breaking our families, it's hurting our community. And this is what we need to invest in, not in incarceration.
Right. All right, I'm going to throw out a couple more questions and then we're going to open it up to Q&A. I would actually like it if somebody could help bring a chair on stage and if Kianya can join us even for this round, because I think she'll have some perspective as well. So I'm going to throw out two questions. Choose one, whichever one feels, like the question you want to answer. They're related, and I'll just kind of go across here. The first question that you can pick from is, what is the single thing you wish policymakers could grasp about your work and adopt as policy or put into practice? Like, I just wish if they did this one thing, that would, I would appreciate that. All right, that's question one. Or you can pick, what could we be doing more of? What's the next frontier? Okay. So, yeah.
You're starting with me?
Yeah, let's go here. Yep.
So I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm not going to talk about policy, but I think I'm building on what First Lady shared a bit about narrative. And I think in communication, it's the way we talk and think about people who have been marginalized, and people who have been incarcerated, and just even like the language that we use to describe people. And I wish that policymakers, people with public platforms, remembered that we are all people and humans, and the humanity. We all have stories. Some people have the resources and the accessibility to overcome certain traumas, and some people don't. Some people are born into really challenging and traumatic situations. We, as Americans, as our society, we really lean heavily into this bootstraps narrative and this feeling of like, if you just work hard enough,
Right.
some people have to work a heck of a lot harder and have like and live perfect lives in order to get to the levels that some people are just born into. And so I think that, my push would be that when you're in front of an audience or you have a platform or in the power, that we keep front of mind that we are at first all people with very similar needs, and if we could just be kinder in our thinking, that would really go a long way to then getting us to where we can actually have policy change. Because public narrative, honestly, is one of the large barriers. I mean, you turn on the news and what do we see? Everything is so politicized. We can't get to real change because we can't get over the hurdle of public narrative. And public narrative is so much driven by the people who have the access to the large platforms. So, I think we could be so much further in our work if we could just lead with some kindness and humility and remembering our humanity.
Awesome. Nice. Raquel.
Okay. So I'll choose the second question. What's next? So when we speak about what's next, what Ready for Reentry is planning on doing, and Ready Chicago as well, what we're going to continue to do is try to expand our services to not only our participants, but their families. With Ready for Reentry, what we've done so far was we created a family engagement assessment where we want to find out what are the barriers, what are the needs of the household, how can we better serve you? Because if you're going to support the participant, we know that you have to have some level of stability. And so we can't expect participants to come home and, to a chaos, right, and expect them to thrive, right? And so we understand that, and we're looking at that, and we're going to try to continue to, again, find ways to support the families, whether that be in connecting them to employment opportunities, connecting them to therapy, because, a lot of families need therapy, as well as any resources that they need in order to make sure that they have a good playing field to start off if they're trying to restart their life. And we want to make sure that families also have a place that they can, have some safe haven.
Great stuff. Thank you. All right, MK.
Well, I'll just share with you all the biggest lesson I've learned, and I think it answers this question in this job. So important to listen. Really, don't talk, use your ears and listen, because you can't solve problems unless you really understand and listen. And I should say, try to understand. I'm not sure we all really can understand somebody else's perspective, but we can try our hardest to listen to the people who have this lived experience. Listen to their narrative and learn from them. The most important thing you can do in solving a problem is listen. And this is a lesson I have really learned, and I try to take it to heart in everything that I do. So important. And I just want to say that I am so grateful for the women that I've met with that have been so honest with me and shared their stories. I'm forever grateful. I've made so many friends, and I just can't tell you how special these women are, and I'm so grateful to them for sharing their stories with me to help me, do this work. I couldn't do it without them.
Great. Thank you. Kianya.
Ooh, this is a doozy. I'm going to make this very short. So I'm going to speak about policy and what's next, because I think they are two in the same as a member of the Fully Free Coalition to End Permanent Punishments in the state of Illinois. So I lobby in Springfield every Wednesday. Our House bill just passed, House Bill 1268, which is a probate act to allow individuals that are formerly incarcerated to be the executors of their loved one's estate. So we are headed to the Senate. So my ask is, what's next? Encourage your local senator to support Senate Bill 1502, which is our probate act. So that's what's next for us, changing the narrative. I am not a felon. I am someone's mother. I am 4 small humans' grandmother. I am someone's daughter, sister, aunt, best friend, and wife. And so we are changing the narrative. Reentry is a community sustainability issue, right? The process, the barriers of not allowing us to be part of municipalities, right? Currently in the state of Illinois, if you're a convicted felon, you cannot run for office. You cannot run for local office. You can run for House Representative. You can run for State Senate, as well as U.S. Senate and the President. But you cannot be a part of your local community, right? We are community leaders. We are advocates. We fund our community. I pay taxes. You make sure I pay those. But I am unable to run for alderperson, mayor, school board councils, be on the fire commission. I'm not able to do any of those things as someone that has a felon on their record. So these are the things that we're pushing with our Peace Act, which is an omnibus bill. Currently in the state of Illinois, there are 1,200 statutes overlaying over that are restricting individuals or placing barriers on us to be active in our local communities. So this is what's next. This is what's next. Support campaigns and individuals that are leading the work, that have the lived experience, that we know what the consequences are behind our actions. However, we have come home and we have served our debt to society. Our sentence said that we served our debt to society. However, we still have these barriers that are placed upon us. So that's what I got.
Perfect. Thank you. Good job. I know you all thought that round of questions was worth it. We only have time for 2 more questions. And from the audience, question number 1, how can media of all kinds help instead of increasing stigma? Patrice talked a little bit about this. Does anybody want to add a little bit more? How can media help?
I'd be happy to. I think it would be great if the media would tell some of these stories, the narratives that led up to incarceration. I think we need to try to understand each other more in this country and be kind of a more empathetic, kinder population. We're so polarized now, and we make assumptions about people when you really shouldn't assume anything about people. I think we all need to take the time to try to understand each other. And I think the media could do a very good job with that if they would just take the time to tell some of these stories, some of the stories that I've heard.
Yeah, to tell the story of Fully Free. No, I'm
Absolutely. To tell the story of Fully Free. We are a group of directly impacted individuals. Ms. Benford is one of the founding board members of the Fully Free campaign. So we are success stories, and there are more of us. There are hundreds of us. We have a statewide coalition from the north of Illinois to the southernmost, which is our bottom 7 counties. So we are being successful, and we are organizing. We are building leaders within our community. With the help of Heartland Alliance, they have ushered us in and taken us on, and we're grateful for their efforts in supporting us and advocating us. So we are leaders. We are parents. We are small business owners. We are farmers. I farm, y'all. We are leading our communities. I am a instructor on a campus that is shaping future minds. I can't run for mayor of the city, though. Mm-hmm. I can't be on the school board. I can't be on city council. I can't even be on the board at the university. So this is how media can help, by reshaping the way that people see things and helping us change the narrative. We are not formally incarcerated. We are directly impacted by the justice system. We are not ex-felons. We are directly impacted individuals. So first person, this is who we are, not what we've done. So that's how the media can help with moving this movement forward.
Beautiful, thank you. So we know early childhood is such an important developmental period, and there's a question here about whether you would consider adding early childhood elements to Ready, but I would say to any of the work out there, like what are we doing on early childhood? What could we be doing on early childhood as it relates to families who have an incarcerated parent?
So yeah, that's actually a really good question. Ready for Reentry, we are in our infancy stage, right? We just launched a year ago, so we're still ironing out the kinks. However, we have been hit with that question like really early. Like earlier when I mentioned that we called a family and she mentioned that he's coming home. However, I need a job too, but it's hard for me because I have a young child, and for some reason, I believe it's like you only go to school for like 2 or 3 hours a day, like a preschool or some sort of. I'm like, how you find a job with only that, And so I'm like, I don't know who thought of that policy, right? But clearly, she needed all day childcare, right, so that she can actually work and provide income for her and her family. And so simply what I did was like, okay, let's figure out, let's do this Illinois Action for Children's, let's go on their website, let's figure out how we can, get you enrolled in some sort of support, right? Because that is definitely a barrier to a lot of our families with young children who want to work. So it's not like I'm changing the narrative, right? So a lot of people think that you don't want to work, you don't want to, do anything, but that's not the case. A lot of people actually do want to work, but they have these issues or these barriers that make it really difficult to do so. So maybe one day.
Can I just say something really quick? I don't know if any of you watched the governor's budget address, but this is his number one priority in his budget this year, that every child in Illinois will have access to high quality preschool and high quality and safe childcare all across the state, Southern Illinois to Northern Illinois.
Great.
This is he has spent his lifetime working on early childhood education, and he understands that this really is the key to fixing a lot of our social and economic problems in the state. So let's all support him in his budget.
Great. Patrice, last word here.
Sure. Oh, okay. So let it be a good one. I agree with everything that's been said, and childcare is such an important thing. But I'm a founding ED, so I'm building an organization, and I think a lot about what are the policies that I want to put in place as a leader, as an employer, and so I think for this audience, it could be really helpful to think about as at your job, like how are you supporting your staff people? How are you supporting your staff members that are parents? And I think that is something that we could do to be helpful. When we talk about early childhood, there's always this focus on the children, but it's all, children don't exist in vacuums, right? They're surrounded by families. So we have to, a part of early childhood is supporting the family. It's supporting the mother in particular who's, I am a new mom, and I realized like, oh, wow, this is like another full-time job. In addition to like, wow, this is a lot of work. And employers, we have to be better to our staff people who are especially have these other full-time jobs as parents. It's putting in policies that allow people who are caregivers to do the full-time work of caregiving and also their paid work. So early childhood is bigger than just the child. It's the family as well.
I love it. It starts with us. Like that's how you reach scale really quickly. So thank you, everybody. I am going to close us out. What an incredible panel. I want to just again thank this amazing panel of leaders for sharing their wisdom and experience. And thank you to all of you for sharing your morning with us, your questions, for your commitment to learning more about the impact of the criminal legal system on women. We know that this is a large and ever-evolving subject and that you're probably going to have more questions. Our questions could pop up later. We will be sending you a follow-up email to give you ways to contact us and keep up to date with our various initiatives around this. We also want to give you ways to connect to the work through volunteering, advocacy, and financial support to our partners who live and breathe this work every day. So watch for that email, and we hope that you will stick around. We have food and drink available for the next half hour or so. And today is the last day of Women's History Month, so we hope you'll stick around to celebrate it with us. Thank you, everyone.